Hi, everybody. Today's Wednesday, November 5th, 2025, and our friend Scott Ritter joins us. Welcome back, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
Please subscribe and hit like button, helping us reaching more people. And let me start, Scott, with something that you may not be that much willing to talk about, which is what's going on in your state, the state of New York. And the New York, in the New York City, we had an election, and the outcome was Zohran Mamdani. He is a Muslim immigrant, and he's socialist. And he said that he's going to arrest Netanyahu if he goes to New York. Many issues, and with this, with his sort of view toward the things in New York, we know that many people in New York, Jews, supported him, and it shows that 75% of the people below 30 years old, they voted for him, which is huge in my opinion for a city like New York City. What is happening in the New York City that could influence the future of the Democratic Party?
Look, all I know is that there was a fair and free election held, and the people of New York City voted for a man who was qualified to be mayor legally. I don't give a damn if he's an immigrant. I don't give a damn about anything about him. He's a U.S. citizen who meets the qualifications, and he won. So hooray! People vote people in, and then they get to hold them to account. If you don't like him, where were the alternatives? Why could the best they come up with is Curtis Sliwa and Andrew Cuomo? You're really telling me a city of 12.5 million people could only come up with those two guys to oppose this guy? I mean, if you don't like him, come up with somebody better. Who else did you want there? A failed governor? An aging guardian angel? So no, I mean, I'm fed up with people who condemn this guy. Are his politics my politics? Nope. Would I have voted for him? Probably not. But he is allowed to run for mayor, and the majority of people in New York City voted for him. The vast majority of people in New York City voted for him. And the last time I checked, in a representative democracy, that's what counts. So I'm not worried about this. I mean, New York mayors have famously found out that the citizens of New York aren't quiet when they're not happy. And if this guy fails to deliver on his promises, he's not going to have an easy time. So good luck to him. I hope he gives the citizens of New York City everything they wanted, everything they expected. But we'll see. He wouldn't be the first failure of a mayor, and he wouldn't be the first successful mayor. Mayors come and go. I can't get upset when the people of the United States vote for somebody and put them into office. As long as it's a fair and free election, it means it's a battleground of ideas, and he had the best ideas out there. At least the ones that resonated with the population that mattered, which is the voting population of New York City. That's how democracy works. If I don't like it, then golly gee, why don't I run against them next time or find somebody who will? That's it. I'm not worried about any of this. I'm really not. I don't lose any sleep over this.
Yeah. And let's go to what's going on between the United States and Russia. We know that the president of the United States said that during the interview he had on 60 Minutes, he said that Russia and China are testing nuclear bombs and some sort of nuclear test they're doing, and they're not they don't say anything about it. Behind the scene, they're doing this, secretly they're doing this, which in the same interview, they showed the commander and who had the exact he knew what's going on with Russia and China with the case of testing nuclear. I don't remember his name, but he said that there is no evidence that Russia and China are testing nuclear bombs. And today we learned Vladimir Putin has responded to Donald Trump's nuclear rhetoric, calling it a serious issue. He instructed Russia's Security Council and defense agencies to analyze US statements and prepare proposals on possible nuclear test readiness. What's going on, Scott? I think you are one of the, very qualified characters or person to talk about these issues when it comes to the arm control, nuclear bombs, and nuclear issues. What's your take on that?
My take is that the United States of America is governed by one of the dumbest men in the world who doesn't understand the power of words. And before he speaks on topics such as this, he should probably get better briefed. This is a man who was told that the Russians had carried out 2 nuclear tests, one of the Burevestnik nuclear-powered cruise missile and the other of the Poseidon nuclear-powered underwater drone. Both of these are, nuclear capable, meaning they can carry nuclear warheads. But the tests were of the nuclear propulsion systems. And so, he somehow in his brain decided that he was going to call these nuclear weapons tests. No, they're tests of nuclear delivery vehicles that happen to be nuclear powered. Maybe that's just too many nuclears for Trump's brain to handle. But the bottom line is, he spoke out and said, they're doing tests, so I'm going to order tests. Now, here's the important part. He said, I'm going to order the Secretary of War, that would be Pete Hegseth, to carry out a nuclear weapons test similar to what was done. And everybody freaked out and thought, oh, my God, that means that the United States is going to go and violate the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty and start testing, actual nuclear warheads. And yet today, the Secretary of War carried out his instructions. They tested a Minuteman III missile without a warhead. They tested the delivery system, very similar to what the tests that were done by, but we do this all the time. This isn't the first Minuteman III test this year. We've tested a whole range of Trident D5s, delivery systems, and it should not raise anybody's eyebrows. It shouldn't get anybody's pulse up. But then he turns around and he says things like, we know the Russians are testing in secret. We know the Chinese are testing in secret. Well, the secrecy are the tests of their missiles. Of course, they're secret. I mean, Russia's like a broadcast that, hey, today we're going to flight test at Burevestnik, although apparently a NATO ship was monitoring the test and the Russians didn't do anything to disguise it. But your words matter. And so now you're the Russians and you have to be pragmatic. You have to say, is this guy just stupid? The answer, of course, is an unqualified yes. But you can't run your policy based upon, we're just interpreting his words as stupidity. His words could also be interpreted to be that the United States believes that Russia and China are carrying out secret nuclear weapons tests, and therefore the United States must be prepared to carry out tests of its own. But if that's the case, then it isn't the Secretary of War that's going to handle that. It'd be a completely different American agency responsible for the upkeep of nuclear weapons, and the Department of Energy. And there's no evidence that we are getting ready to do a nuclear test, and there's no evidence that the Russians or the Chinese have been doing or getting ready. All countries do what are known as subcritical testing. That is, we test the nuclear device model in a manner that tests everything except the actual fission event. We don't get that fission event, and then we extrapolate based upon data whether or not the weapon would work, etc. Everybody does that, and that is in compliance with the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. But now the Russians are listening to the president's word. You see, the Russian president told his foreign ministry and intelligence services and defense department to assess what the president's saying. Hey, guys, if you're watching this show, I just told you what I think it is. Don't panic. This is just Trump being Trump. Sorry about that. But, the other thing people need to understand is that the United States Congress is funded every year the Department of Energy to be prepared to resume nuclear testing on short notice if needed. And there's a lot of pressure here in the United States for the U.S. government to withdraw from the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty and begin testing of nuclear weapons designs. our bombs are old designs, and many of these bombs have to be all the bombs eventually have to be maintained over time. They're not just the plutonium pits which have to be um, reworked and upgraded over time, but there's also other um, you know nuclear isotopes that are involved in this that lose potency over time, and certain gases have to be reinserted in certain quantities. Um, it a weapon has to be maintained, and you know if you want a nuclear deterrent system, you have to be assured that the weapons will work as designed, or else, because if you're not assured, the enemy's not going to be assured. And if they think your weapons aren't going to work, you lose that edge. And so there are many people saying, look, our weapons are so old, we need to do some testing, limited testing, just to confirm that what we're doing works. The weapons worked as designed. Maybe we have some new weapons that we'd like to test, the W76-2 low yield nuclear warhead. We'd like to test that to confirm that works as advertised. But so far, the treaty is held. Our commitment to no nuclear testing stands, and I believe it stands to this day. I don't believe the president has given any direction to anybody involved in actual nuclear weapons testing to begin to prepare for a nuclear weapons test. He simply, because he's dumber than dirt, he uses words that have meanings that he doesn't mean to impart. That's what I think is going on here.
Scott, how did we get here? You remember we talked about Tulsi Gabbard. It seems to me that she's isolated within the Trump administration. Nobody cares about what she's talking about. Any issue, domestic issue, foreign issue. What is that in your opinion?
Well, first of all, we're dealing with a president that doesn't understand effective staff work and doesn't understand what it means to be part of a team. He envisions himself as the captain of a team that, he doesn't trust. He only trusts himself or a handful of people around him. Tulsi Gabbard was made the director of national intelligence, but we saw early on in her tenure that, he doesn't heed her advice when she spoke to him about Iran, for instance, and their nuclear program. And I would imagine that today, when she speaks about other issues like Venezuela or Russia and nuclear weapons, that he's not heeding that as well, that he listens to a tighter inner circle that she's not part of. It appears that he listens more to the director of the CIA, who is, more politically aligned with Trump. He listens more to Marco Rubio, which I just don't understand, because Rubio hates him with a passion and despises him. And yet he's empowered Rubio not just as a Secretary of State, but as the National Security Advisor, which means Rubio runs honcho over all of these policy issues. He listens to, Sebastian Gorka. He listens to, Keith Kellogg. The person he should be listening to is the person that's empowered by law to talk to him. The presidential daily briefing is done by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, not by the CIA. And so it's Tulsi Gabbard that is the one who is supposed to be providing him with the daily dose of information. But this president has boxed her out, and she has a specific politicized job to do, which is to go back and put her focus on the 2016 Russiagate scandal, and she's doing that job very well. But she's not. The job of the director of national intelligence isn't that of a forensic investigator. They should be looking forward, looking into the future, providing the president with the best intelligence possible about the world we live in. And unfortunately, the person that's best positioned to do that isn't being allowed to do that.
Yeah, you mentioned the situation within the administration, but outside the administration, he's attacking Rand Paul as well, which was one of the few Republicans defending him during the Russiagate. And right now he feels somehow threatened by what Rand Paul is talking about. Is that a serious issue with Donald Trump? Do you think, how do you see that? How do you see these people who, somehow attacking Thomas Massey, Rand Paul, the people who doesn't agree on some issues with him, not totally, but he doesn't, he doesn't, uh, he's not patient in his way of treating them, of dealing with them.
Welcome to the cult of personality, because that's what we have. We don't have a functioning democracy. We don't have an institution that respects diverse opinions and respects the process of debate, dialogue, and discussion that normally is supposed to take place as complicated policies are put together. This is how you get a bipartisan consensus on things so that as policy go forward, you have support on both sides of the aisle. This is a winner-take-all approach by a man who views himself as a literal king. He doesn't view himself as the president of the United States. He views himself as the dictator of the United States. And it's a cult of personality. It's literally what Donald wants, Donald gets. I mean, when was the last time you saw an American president gather all people around, put their hands out as if he is the conduit to God, praying to God through him? In America, where state religion is verboten, and yet he's posturing himself as if he is the conduit to God for so many. This is dangerous. I mean, this is really, really dangerous. It's dysfunctional in terms of actual democracy. It's dysfunctional in terms of how this constitutional republic is designed to work. It's three separate but equal branches of government. And yet what Donald Trump is doing is bullying both the judiciary and the legislative branch into falling in line. If he said if people go against him, he's going to ruin them. He's talking about Republican senators. I mean, this is very, very dangerous times that we live in, because we are governed by a man who appears not to recognize constitutional limits and appears to be prepared to put all the power that does in fact accrue to him to use it in any way he sees fit. The Constitution be damned.
Yeah. One of the alarming issues during the meeting that Putin had with his cabinet, the Russian defense minister said that deployment plans for the Dark Eagle hypersonic missile system in Europe and in the Asia Pacific, capable of reaching central Russia just in 6 to 7 minutes. I don't know if there is some sort of communication between Russia and the United States, some back channels, Pete Hegseth somehow some sort of communication between Pete Hegseth and his counterpart in Russia. Is there anything of that sort? Because we've learned that Peskov has mentioned that there is no phone call planned between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. But how is the communication between the two administrations? These sort of meetings in Russia shows that there is no, if there is, it's not that much efficient. What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, when you have back channel communications, the implication is that the president implicitly trusts the person doing the back channel communications to accurately reflect the position of the United States and accurately report information back from Russia. It's a non-standard way of doing business. It's been done forever. I mean, JFK famously had several back channels into Khrushchev that helped bring the Cuban Missile Crisis to a close. Even during the Biden administration, when Joe Biden wasn't interfacing with Vladimir Putin at all, there were back channels taking place. The CIA, was definitely involved in the back channel between Narishkin and who was the CIA director under Biden, Burns, maybe William Burns. But could the CIA, the CIA has muscle memory in that regard. So could Radcliffe be a back channel? If he is, nobody's talking about it, which sometimes is good. But the problem is you can have the channel. It's like AI, you can have AI, but if all you do is feed it garbage, the AI is going to spew garbage. I mean, this is the way it is. What's going into this back channel? Who's advising the president, and how is the information coming back being given to the president? I mean, obviously, this would be a back channel outside of the normal Director of National Intelligence, bailiwick, and so it's not being factored into the.
Yeah, it seems something has happened with Scott's
There we go.
connection.
I
Yeah,
think we're
you're back. You're back. Go ahead.
Yep. They the FBI hasn't jammed me fully this time, but we'll give them a minute. Um, the point is, you know, what filter is there? The Russians. I mean, Donald Trump said something the other day that raised my eyebrows. He said, "We are in negotiations with the Russians about arms control." But every Russian I've talked to says there's nothing going on. Nothing. I mean, so is there a back channel where it's being whispered? But then who backstops them? The arms control network here in the United States is gone, finished, dissolved. There is no dedicated Bureau of Arms Control. It's been melded in. Arms control responsibilities have been melded into State Department bureaus now that also do counter narcotics and counter terrorism. So there's no dedicated group. And the 1,300 State Department professionals were fired on July 11th of this year. These were the people that did arms control, the Russian specialists and others. They're gone. So who's doing the work? And this is the danger. And it's something I've been saying all along. The danger is if you don't have a team of people that can contact their counterparts in Russia, the vacuum of information that's created, creates the opportunity for the Russians. Now they have to speculate. Instead of knowing what the United States is doing, they have to speculate. And when you start speculating, you have to think worst case scenarios. And so you have to prepare for worst case scenarios. And that's the policy direction you go, which should be the last policy direction anybody in the United States wants Russia to go. The Trump administration is paying the price for this narcissistic egomaniac who, wants to run the presidency as a cult of personality instead of this chief executive of an executive branch of government that has a bureaucracy and an infrastructure and a methodology in place for making policy and overseeing policy, implementation of policy. That's out the window right now. This is literally the definition of chaos.
Scott, my understanding of what's going on between the United States and Russia when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine, whenever someone talks about the situation with Ukraine, or somehow Donald Trump's every time he comes out, he says something new, or he repeats the same sort of rhetoric. But we cannot learn from the United States what's going on between the United States and Russia. But when Russia comes out this way and Putin says this is a serious issue, it means something, I think, for us. They're not going to panic easily. When they say something, they mean it. That's problematic, in my opinion. That shows how fragile is the communication between the two countries.
Yeah. First of all, there's no panic in Russia. I mean, there's no panic at all. They're just doing businesses, as they see fit. Russians take treaties very seriously, and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty is a foundational, treaty document for arms control. And it's a very serious thing if one side is talking.
Yeah. We've lost you, Scott. Can you hear me? Yeah, you're back.
Yeah,
I'm
back.
Yeah.
It's a serious thing if one side is talking in a way that could be interpreted as walking away from the treaty. So, of course, the Russians are taking this very seriously. But, the Russians have made a comment recently coming from the Kremlin that I think all Americans should pay heed to. I think it was Dmitry Peskov who made the comment that, in the past, it was that the Russians were trying to get a meeting with Trump or looking forward for a meeting with Trump, and thought that the meeting itself could be a pathway towards getting something done. But now what they're saying is there's no need for a meeting with Trump because there's no reason to have a meeting if the United States isn't able to put anything on the table. And so the script has been flipped. It used to be Russia that had to put something on the table. Russia was the one saying that we're waiting for the Russian proposal and things of that nature. Now the Russians say, you got our proposal. It ain't changing. And unless you're willing to put something on the table that, moves our proposal forward, there's no reason to talk. And so that has changed too. So when we talk about, the United States, Russia, and Ukraine, understand this: Russia is on an irreversible path when it comes to Ukraine. There will be no stopping. There won't be no backing up. They will continue down this path until they achieve the outcome that they desire. And that outcome has been explained in great detail, not only to Ukraine, but to the United States and indirectly to Europe. There are no surprises here. Everybody knows what Russia expects to happen before you can talk about, cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire, etc. And I think what we're seeing is that the Trump administration understands this reality, and they also understand that they can't vocalize a policy that embraces this Russian outcome. So they're washing their hands of Ukraine and putting the burden on Europe. And that is the American position on Ukraine right now. So, there are no surprises here. This war, unfortunately, is going to finish the old-fashioned way. And that is, the Russians are going to kill every Ukrainian out there until the Ukrainians stop fighting. There will be no negotiated settlement. There will be an unconditional surrender. When that happens, I don't know. Russians aren't putting a timeline on it, but the idea that there could, that this war can stop and there will be a negotiated peace, that's out. Russia is committed to winning this war. They've always been committed, but they were in the past willing to have diplomacy interject itself and fast forward, some of the processes through negotiation. But now it appears that Ukraine is incapable of doing that, and Europe and the United States are unwilling to do that. And so Russia will force the issue on the battlefield. All you pro-Ukrainian yahoots out there, you can read whatever you want. Prokofsk is falling. Ukrainians are dying. Kupiansk is going to fall. And then we could just go on and on and on. The war is going to end in Russia's favor. And the only thing that's going to change, besides the territorial losses, is the tally of dead. And far more Ukrainians are going to die than Russians. That's the harshest reality there is.
I don't know if Donald Trump knows what's going on in Pokrovsk, Scott. Do you think the information he's receiving is still from Ukrainian intelligence, from British intelligence, or they have something to do with their integral system in Ukraine to receive what's going on in Ukraine?
Well, what's interesting is the Russians, something else came out of the Russian meeting yesterday, is that the Russians apparently were providing Trump with a daily briefing on what the front line really was. They said, we were giving Trump the actual front line so he could compare and contrast it with the lies that he was getting from Ukraine. And now they've said, we've stopped doing that. We don't care anymore because it doesn't matter. The United States is not up to reality. There was a time when the United States was told to stop collecting on Ukrainian order of battle, meaning to stop following the front line. And because the data we were collecting and our analysts were assessing gave us
yeah, we cannot hear you, Scott. Yeah,
gave us a result that was different from what the Ukrainians were selling us. And so we were told that we accept the Ukrainian version of events, and that's what would be briefed and such. We're fully capable of knowing the truth. We have intelligence capabilities that can ascertain the truth. We're also fully capable of cooking the books. There was a famous intelligence analyst in Vietnam, Adams, I think his last name was, Sam Adams, and he talked about just how the CIA and the Pentagon cooked the books on enemy casualties, wildly exaggerating the enemy casualties so as to make it look like the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong couldn't sustain this fight, when the truth was known to people like Adams and others who were doing the assessments. We can lie all the time. We're very capable of lying, but the lies that we tell are actually based upon the truth. For instance, I can guarantee you that the CIA knew that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. They knew because I knew and I told them, but they were told to cook the books. And so they did. And I can guarantee you there are intelligence analysts in the United States who know the truth about what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, but they're not allowed to tell the truth. They have to cook the books. Junior analysts have access to raw data and they assess that data. But then when they prepare reports, they send it up to mid-level management who's been instructed by senior management that there are certain, angles and caveats, et cetera, that have to come into play. And middle management starts massaging the data, sending it back for a rewrite or a relook, or just rejecting the report, putting it down as a footnote. And so it gets massaged till it gets to the top. And then, the job of the senior guys is to make the consumer happy, make the president happy. The president wants to believe that the Ukrainians are winning. So here we provide you a brief, Mr. President, the Ukrainians are winning. And the president, oh, good, they're winning. So we now can do this, that, and the other thing. Unfortunately, that's where we are in the intelligence business today. We get back to Tulsi Gabbard. It's her job to stop that nonsense, but she's been pushed to the side. John Radcliffe, unfortunately, has been demonstrated to be an absolute liar and manipulator of intelligence. I'll give you a brief example. If you go back to the issue of Russiagate 2016, Radcliffe knew that Tulsi Gabbard was getting ready to release a report. And so he preempted a report with his own 5-page quick summary of the processes involved in creating the 2016 intelligence community analysis that was then released in 2017, and its unclassified version became very controversial. And he lied, straight out lied about the processes, who was involved, the timetables, et cetera. And then you see Tulsi, publishes her report, and I think it took Radcliffe by surprise because she declassified things that, as somebody who used to be in the business, shouldn't have been declassified. I mean, it gave away an awful lot, but by declassifying it, she eliminated any chance for people like Radcliffe and others to politically whitewash the event. But it showed everything about his memorandum was a bald-faced lie. Why did he do this? Because the person responsible for the intelligence community assessment was the same person briefing President Trump. She was a CIA official. She was briefing the president. And once Tulsi Gabbard went forward with her revelation, this person was fired. Her clearance was revoked for cause. But Radcliffe was covering for her. That's the reality of the intelligence business. They're not here to tell the truth. They're here to protect those who tell lies.
Scott, you remember during the Biden administration, if we wanted to know what is the official policy, we had to listen to Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan. And these two positions are somehow merged in the Trump administration, and both of them are represented by Marco Rubio. He's the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor to Donald Trump. But he doesn't talk that much. We cannot hear him that much to understand what is the official policy. And every time Donald Trump comes out and says something, it's some sort of bipolar comments. He goes to the left and right. You don't see any sort of balance in his sort of comments. Who's to believe? We have to listen to somebody within the administration to understand what's going on with the foreign policy of the United States, with the official policy of the United States. Who's that person to you?
Donald Trump, the cult of personality. I mean, the other person you hear more than anybody right now is Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury. He's out there. What you don't hear from is Marco Rubio. He's silent. There's a reason why. Marco Rubio is a political competitor to Donald Trump. Donald Trump knows this. I mean, he didn't pick Marco Rubio because he likes Marco Rubio. He picked Marco Rubio because he was given $100 million by, Miriam Adelson, who has apparently decided that Israel is more important to her than the United States of America. And Donald Trump acknowledges that. Yet he took $100 million from a known agent of Israel. Her husband wanted Marco Rubio to be vice president, therefore next in line to succession. And Trump said, I refuse that. That will not happen. So the next best thing was the Secretary of State, which is also a known stepping stone to, being a candidate for the presidency. Hillary Clinton famously used it as such. And so.
We cannot hear you, Scott, again. Yeah, it seems that. Can you hear me? Yeah, you're back.
Okay.
You're back.
Yep. And so, Rubio got this, but, Rubio despises Donald Trump, despises him openly. He can't even hide it. Look at the photographs of various meetings and Rubio's demeanor as Trump is speaking. Stone cold face, staring, not happy with what he's hearing because he knows he's an actor. His job is to act, and so it's I can't imagine how frustrating it must be for Marco Rubio. I have no sympathy for the guy. I don't like him at all. But he has a job and he's not being allowed to do his job. I think Trump gives him certain latitude. I think Marco Rubio's ego is being massaged by the Venezuela portfolio, which he appears to be managing both as Secretary of State and as the National Security Advisor. But even there, he's going to find that, he is Pinocchio. He is a puppet, and Donald Trump is his puppet master. And Pinocchio doesn't get to do anything that the puppet master doesn't want him to do. Bessent right now is talking because Trump has put a lot of foreign policy emphasis on the economy and these things, and Bessent is adequately articulating what Trump. But we'll watch. Anytime it becomes controversial, Bessent will be pulled off the stage, and Trump will take center stage. This is the Donald Trump show, and the only star of the show is Donald Trump. There will be no competition. Nobody will be allowed to shine brighter than Donald Trump. And, again, the smart people understand that the president is the president, and, all credit is accrued at the president. That's the way it always should work. But presidents usually are smart enough to know that they have to have competent people, competent staff, and credit should go where credit is due. I mean, if a Secretary of State succeeds, they should be called out with their success. Nobody's allowed to succeed except Donald Trump. That's it.
Yeah. Scott, here is what the Russian defense minister said, that the United States is currently developing an ICBM with a range of 13,000 kilometers capable of carrying nuclear warhead. And do you feel that the arms control is fading away, or how do you see this sort of advancement in missiles? You see in Russia, in the United States, they're doing this. I'm sure that China is doing this, Iran is doing this, but what is the limit for these sort of activities when it comes to the arms control?
There's no limit if there's no arms control. And on February 5th of next year, the last remaining strategic nuclear arms control treaty expires, and there's nothing to replace it. Vladimir Putin has spoken about a voluntary moratorium of 1 year on the caps. That means the numbers of deployed nuclear weapons, 1,550 per side. But he's also said that this is contingent on the United States not doing anything precipitous that changes the strategic balance. And all Donald Trump is capable of doing is things that change the strategic balance. You earlier mentioned Dark Eagle. If Dark Eagle is in fact deployed in Europe, this is going to be very problematic for the Russians. What about Golden Dome, the hypothetical missile defense shield that Trump wants to put in place? Belousov has spoken about a new, ICBM. That's the Sentinel missile program. He spoke about a new submarine. I think the Dreadnought class. That might be to replace the Ohio class. New bomber, the B-21 bomber. He talked about upgrading the B-52 from the H to J model. All these things are happening, but again, let's just get down to reality. The Sentinel missile program is dead in the water because it's too expensive. And Congress has put the kibosh on it right now while, the various companies involved, re-examine their proposals. They had thought they could build a missile that would fit into the existing Minuteman silos, and they can't. That means that in addition to the missile, they have to rebuild all new silos, and now the price tag has gone into trillions of dollars. So instead, we're upgrading the Minuteman III. We're not upgrading, I'm sorry, we're extending the life of the Minuteman III, a service life extension program. But the Minuteman III has been around for a long time, and many of the factories that used to produce components for Minuteman III no longer are producing components. There's nobody who can produce. So in order to keep Minuteman III in play, we're going to have to reduce the numbers because we're going to have to cannibalize some of the Minuteman III to keep the other ones operational. So we're going to be looking at 450 missiles, probably dropping down to 300 missiles. That's the reality. On the submarine, I mean, yeah, we've got a submarine program in mind, but look at the Virginia class attack submarine. We're supposed to be producing 2.5 a year to meet the requirements, but we're actually producing 1.7 a year, which means we're behind on that. We don't have, shipyards that are just sitting idle. So where are we going to produce this new submarine, and at what cost? And it's going to go through the roof. The B-52H is the current strategic bomber. We're talking about upgrading it to the new J standard, putting new electronics, avionics, new engines, the whole thing. But the cost of doing this is prohibitively high. So high, in fact, that they're saying, well, we should just build more B-21 Raider bombers. But again, building more with what? We don't have unlimited production space. What time does this take place? The reality is the United States is very far behind Russia in terms of the modernization of our strategic nuclear deterrent force. The Russians have a whole bunch of options available to them today, from the Sarmat missile, which Putin says is entering combat service on an experimental basis, but will enter full combat service sometime in the future. The Oreshnik, which is an intermediate range missile, is in serial production, already entered into service. The Avant-Garde hypersonic maneuverable warhead is in service on a number of missile options. They have the new YARS advanced, an advanced version of the YARS ICBM, mobile and silo-based with new warhead configurations. They have the Burevestnik, which they just tested, a nuclear-powered cruise missile. They have the Poseidon, nuclear-powered underwater drone. They have a new class of Russian ballistic missile submarines. The Russians are ahead of us because they've been making the investments necessary to have this potential. What the Russians have done successfully is develop an idea, design, and then mothball it, hold it in abeyance until, which time it either can be canceled altogether or put forward. That costs money to do that. We in the United States don't do that. Our defense industry isn't about doing what's best for the defense of America, but it's doing what's best for the shareholder, for the board. And so everything is, done with the bottom line in mind, how much money they can make from the American taxpayer. And so we get weapons that are very expensive, take a long time to build, and aren't very good, whereas the Russians get weapons that are very good, not so expensive, and can be built in a relatively short period of time.
You've mentioned the Golden Dome. Belousov, the Russian defense minister, he said that the Golden Dome envisions both intercepting and pre-launch destructions of Russian and Chinese missiles. It's go on preemptive attacks and somehow attacking Russia and China before launching their missiles. Is that the case?
I don't believe it's a nuclear preemptive attack. I think what we have are some weapons, drones that are designed to operate over the area in which launches could take place, that are equipped with missiles that can do the intercept at the launch phase. So as a missile emerges from its silo, the drones will fire a weapon that will shoot it down. So we want to get them there. We get them in the mid-flight, and then we get them on reentry. So we want to attack their systems at all phases, but it's not a nuclear preemptive attack. It's about surging forward certain drone capabilities that hover in the vicinity of the area, and then when a missile is launched, they'll fire an interceptor.
The other point, Scott, what Putin said during the meeting, he's talking about the national unity in Russia, the foreign provocators, and the pseudo-national senators abroad who trying to manipulate Russia from outside. Various ethnicities are living in Russia. We know that. And, whenever I talk with Paul Kerr-Robert, he says that Russia, China, and Iran have no option but, come together and somehow have some sort of partnership or alliance toward what's going on in the region. Because we have to accept that the Central Asia is growing to be Caucasus, and Central Asia is growing to be a major issue for Iran and Russia. How do you see the nature of what's going on, considering these concerns of the Russian president in terms of how the things can be manipulated from outside? And how is that bringing these countries together?
I think we're talking about two separate things that might not be linked. Um, I think the Russian president is vocalizing a reality that has people like Mikhail Khodorkovsky, I believe his name is, or Khodorovsky, um, the former energy oligarch that was arrested and imprisoned by Putin, then released and was allowed to go to London with billions of his dollars. He is actively funding Russian immigrants in London and elsewhere, creating a network that is trying to penetrate back into Russia using business circles. You know, before Russia was sanctioned in 2022, you could in Moscow, you could be talking a significant percentage of the people had pro-Western sympathies because of Western business connections, and they viewed the connectivity with the West as being essential for Russia's future. Now, many of these people fled after the invasion, and many others just went dormant. We saw, the fate of Navalny, who was one of these people funded in this manner. They aren't very effective, but they are a persistent problem, and the Russian president has decided to call them out. I think it's because they are starting to have an impact on public opinion, not in Russia but outside Russia. Your good friend Gilbert Doctorow is one of the people who have fallen for this line of bullshit, straight up, pure, 100% unfiltered bullshit. That there's somehow a class of people in Russia today who are actively working in opposition to Vladimir Putin. It just isn't happening. Are there people who are dissatisfied with certain policies? Of course there are. But are they politicizing this to the point that they represent a threat to the presidency? Not at all. But when you have this perception existing on the outside, it feeds the policy options of the people that Russia needs to be working with to solve problems. So, for instance, in the United States, where you have an establishment that has been focused on regime change in Russia for some time now, but only to be presented with a reality check that ain't going to happen as long as Putin is healthy and in control of his faculties. Suddenly you start having this new thing come up, and people go, "Oh, wait a minute, maybe we can do that," and that alters policy options. Remember, Putin was expecting Trump to be more receptive to a pathway to peace and normalization of relations. And now the Russians have to accept the reality that Trump wasn't the man they thought he was, that he can't deliver on what they hoped he could deliver on. And so they have to look at a broader spectrum of policy inputs. And one of these is, of course, what's happening to shape perceptions abroad about Russia. And he's pointing that out, but that's not a sign of panic on the part of Russia. It's just a sign of reality that this is happening. We need to be prepared to deal with what this is happening. Not about opposition inside Russia rising up, but the perceptions that exist about Russia abroad. And now we get into the whole propaganda and counter propaganda thing. So Russia may RT may be directed to do a better job of selling the Russian reality to an international audience than they have been to date. Who knows? I mean, this is a Russian policy prerogative, but I think that's what's going on. Talking about China, Russia, and Iran learning to work together more. This was good. This is inevitable in a world where the United States sanctions and punishes nations for simply existing. They will, those nations that are punished will gravitate to each other. And if you look at the geography of the three nations, it makes sense. It's sort of interior lines of communication. Russia, Iran, China. Now we're talking about Central Asia, the Caucasus. You're looking at a geopolitical map that defines itself. And I think the Russians, the Iranians, and Chinese are going to come together closer with not just economic policy, but security policy, foreign policy, development policy, working together to make sure that their game map, the part of the world they live in, is thoroughly integrated, sort of a operating off of interior lines. You're not going to be held hostage to the need to ship things by sea, where you can be interdicted by American shipping or blockades. You can be denied access to the Suez Canal, etc. Now you're talking about a rail line from St. Petersburg to Bandar Abbas. You're talking about a rail line from Western China straight into Tehran. And I think this is just the natural state of affairs, but I think they're not necessarily connected to one another, the two issues.
Yeah. Scott, Venezuela, let's talk about what's going on in Venezuela. Do you think what is going on every time Donald Trump says nothing going to happen, we're not going to attack Venezuela? I feel that the attack we're getting closer to the attack, US attack on Venezuela. Because it was the same case with Iran. And every time he said, no, we're not, we're negotiating, we're getting somewhere with Iran. How do you think if they attack Venezuela, it's going to be like the attack on Iran? With drones, something internal, CIA, or they're gonna do something like what they did in Syria. They're gonna capture the oil infrastructure, the main, resources of the country, then put pressure on the government. Or maybe the third option would be the attack on the military facilities, on the military bases in Venezuela. Then, I don't know, do some sort of decapitation together with that. What's your take on that?
I think we have to filter everything through the reality of American domestic politics. The Republicans got their butts handed to them in these recent elections. And the Republicans, MAGA, has to sit back and say, what happened and why did this happen? What aren't we doing right in terms of communicating? And it seems to me the worst possible course of action would be get America involved in a ground war in Venezuela that drags on and has body bags coming home. There's no scenario that can be implemented today that resolves the Venezuelan problem absolutely before midterm elections. And the reality is every option you just outlined probably has Americans dying in the lead up to midterm elections, which I don't think will go well for the Trump administration. And so I think you're going to see a lot of talking, continued peripheral attacks like the boats. The CIA will continue to put pressure on Maduro. If something happens where a window of opportunity avails itself for regime change, et cetera, maybe they pull the trigger. But I would be surprised that if Trump, made a straight out military move to remove Maduro, because it would require, the suppression of Venezuelan military forces that are known to be loyal to Maduro. It would require seizure of critical infrastructure, including oil fields, and it would require, the physical elimination of Maduro, either kill or capture. This is the reality. So, and these require a lot of troops and almost a definite long-term presence of troops on the ground in Venezuela, in a nation where there is the real potential for openly hostile resistance. For a president who ran on a platform of peace, I have a hard time seeing him try to win midterm elections, selling a war of choice to the American people in Venezuela.
Do you think that Venezuela is receiving aid from Russia, Iran, and China? And how deep are they helping Venezuela if that's the case?
I believe they are. I believe we see evidence of that. I don't know. We have some people in the Russian Duma talking about Oreshnik going to Venezuela. I don't think so. If you want to guarantee that the United States floods Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles, go ahead and deploy Oreshnik to Venezuela. It's a strategic system, by the way. Venezuela, you're not going to hand Venezuela that capability. But I do see anti-shipping capability, anti-air capability, maybe some training assistance. I do believe the three nations, but the reality is Venezuela is a long way from any of these countries. And once the war starts, Venezuela will be cut off. So you're not going to be able to have an active supply line, supplying weapons and such. And so the best bet for these people is to, maybe shore up Venezuela's defenses where there are some deficiencies, but to seek a nonviolent outcome to this, use diplomacy to your advantage. And, there's an opportunity now because of the reality of American domestic politics. Again, I can't guarantee what Donald Trump's going to do, and maybe he'll wake up tomorrow and say, launch the boats. But I believe that if he is to strike Venezuela, it has to happen very soon and very decisively, so that he has victory presented to the American people by the summer of 2026. Otherwise, if you're caught up in a quagmire where body bags are coming home and there's no firm victory, this will not go well for him at the polls in November, and then his presidency is over. Yes, he'll have 2 more years, but he'll be fighting impeachment from a Democratic-controlled Congress. So I think you have to factor domestic politics into any discussion about the potential conflict with Venezuela.
Before wrapping up, Scott, just to finalize this talk, looking at the situation with Venezuela, is that a sign for us to understand that the main goal, the main objective of the establishment in the United States is confrontation with Russia, China in a long run? Because other than that, I don't understand why does the Trump administration need to go that far on the case of Venezuela, making things and maybe attacking Venezuela, unless he wants something big and he wants to confront Russia and China in a long run, which is not a positive and good sign for all of us.
I think Venezuela can be boiled down to one thing: Marco Rubio. This is Marco Rubio's pet project. And I think to keep Marco Rubio, as Secretary of State, Marco Rubio isn't going to allow himself to be run over by Donald Trump on everything. You see the dissatisfaction in his face when he's sitting in the room when they talk Russia and Ukraine. He's just not happy. I think you would see similar dissatisfaction on the Middle East. How do you keep Rubio in place? Venezuela. And I think that this is what's happening here. This is Marco Rubio's pet project, and I think that's what it's. I don't think you should read anything into it more than that. Rubio has always sold it as being anti-Russian, anti-Chinese, anti-Hezbollah, anti-Cuban, but it's always been about Marco Rubio playing off of his Cuban background to talk about opposing nations that that operate outside of the sphere of control of the United States. And I think that's what's going on here. I wouldn't read anything broader into that. I think this is a project given to Marco Rubio by Donald Trump to keep him in the game.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to FBI in interfering.
Hey, they let us go without cutting off the internet, so that's a plus.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.